So, what I wanted to share this morning is kind of a rendition with some changes to the talk I gave at OAN a couple of weeks ago now. And Mado had asked me if I could give a talk that morning that pertained to the relationship between Zen and jazz. So I had a sense of what I wanted to do with that, but then Kimberly was reading Tigan's book, Just This Is It, about Dong Shan and his teachings. And she had a question for me. So she showed me the section of the text that that her question was coming from. And it was actually, it contained a statement by the principal Dharma heir of Dongshan. So for those who have Rakusus, Yunju is the name that appears right after Dongshan. So he's in our lineage. He's one of our direct ancestors. And this was a statement attributed to Yunju. And to give him a historical context, his dates are 830 to 902, just to situate him historically during what's referred to as the classic era of Zen in China. And it's a very brief, succinct statement on what is suchness. If you want such a thing, you must be such a person. Already being such a person, why trouble about such a thing? A person of suchness. This also echoes, for a number of you, you've heard me reference from time to time, the Dogen fascicle from Shobo Genzo that's titled Only Buddhas and Buddhas, or Yui Butsu Yo Butsu, or in Mike Newhall's rendition, It Takes One to Know One. It's a very apt way of seeing this. So for us to experience suchness, being in this moment, fresh and new every moment, it's because that's our nature. That's our Buddha nature. That's the way we are. So since this is our nature, already being such a person, why trouble about such a thing? We can't go running around chasing after it. It's already here. Be it. Be just as you are. This sense of authenticity in our Zen practice, being who you are. Don't try to be something else. Don't try to be the model Zen student. Be exactly who you are. Because you are such a person. Related to this is a statement I just encountered within the past day or two. It comes from a book I highly recommend. You've probably read about it because a lot's been written about it over the course of the past few weeks. It's by a well-known author, Michael Pollan, and the title of the book is A World Appears, A Journey into Consciousness. which is why it should be of interest to all Buddhist practitioners, given the level of attention that we give to this thing we call consciousness. And one of the points that already in the first chapter, which is on sentience, one of the points where he brings it to in conclusion is that a pretty large number of scientists now are in agreement that there's kind of an equivalence between life and sentience. If it's a living being, it's a sentient being. There's a smaller group within that group that extends that beyond just living things. Kind of this sense of what we'll call it, using a new agey term, cosmic consciousness. Not as large a group as you would anticipate subscribes to that. But that's also starting to gain more and more adherence. But the quote I wanted to share with you, and it was brought up in this book in the context of what I just laid out about life and sentience. A philosopher named Hans Jonas made the point that only life can know life. Only Buddhas can know Buddhas. And if we back that up a level or two, we come to this. Only life can know life. So I think the basic teaching for us is equivalent between those two statements. That a hammer can't know life. A rock can't know life. But life can know life. And this extends beyond the human realm. Obviously, dogs and cats know life. They know particular lives. But so do viruses and bacteria. They know life. And they're responsive to it. So obviously, we could see where someone might take issue with Hans Jonas and take it the next step, that actually non-living things could be said to know life. And I know there's a group of scientists that would, maybe with some careful elaboration on what those terms are pointing to, but they would be of the opinion that actually knowledge of life extends pretty broadly, maybe to all things. So the sense of understanding that we are such a person, that it begins with us studying the self. To study Zen is to study the self, as Dogen tells us. And to study the self is to forget the self. And again, in Dogen's formulation. And to forget the self is to be realized by the myriad things. So the barrier we put up falls away. And when we practice suchness, this authenticity, moment after moment after moment, being who we are, understanding our Buddha nature. This is our practice. So I began the talk go on with that statement. But as I do in my more elaborate Zen jazz talk, I pull quotes from both Zen masters and jazz masters. So I needed to counter that with a, a statement by a jazz master. And the source for this is actually a downbeat T-shirt that I've had for many years, and they have um, pictures of great musicians and a brief quote by that musician. So I have a shirt with Count Basie on the back of it, and this is Count Basie's version of what Yunju was saying. Count Basie says, I never thought innovation as such was very important. The real innovators did their innovating by just being themselves. Don't go seeking it, chasing after it. Just be yourself. Authenticity in this moment. So being yourself is going to be a different matter each time because of the truth of suchness. Nothing is unchanging. Because of suchness, everything being in motion, everything coming together to create each moment is different. It has to be. So to be yourself, and yet, I'm glad we chanted Sandokai this morning because there are the myriad things. Right in light, there is darkness, but don't see it as darkness. So, right in light, we think of light as being enlightenment, seeing the absolute. But in Zen, the light is actually what allows us to distinguish between this and that. So light is pointing to the relative, and darkness is kind of like the cloud of unknowing, or Saint John of the Cross's uh, dark night of the soul. It's the darkness where we let go of our uh, dis- distinguishing this from that and enter into the world of non-duality. So the fact of the matter is that in our life we have to tend to this and that and the other thing. And that's part of being in suchness as well. How can we bring together being ourselves while also tending to the particular ways of doing things? And of course, Zen is loaded with those. I think my talk next week, in fact, is going to be a talk that I give every couple of years. And it's been at least that long, I think, since the last time. And it's on our ritual. I think it's helpful, especially for the people that are newer to the practice, to have a chance to hear about that and what's going on and what's the point of all of it. And maybe in the process, tighten up our performance of ritual a level or two as a result of that. And that's, taking care of particularities while still being ourselves. So there's this misconception that to be free means we just get rid of all those expectations and uniform ways of doing things. Well, that's fine for some people, but I'm free. And freedom is part of my practice. But actually, when we follow forms, we can be most free. That's the interesting interplay that takes place here. And maybe that's the way it manifests itself. As this pertains to jazz, with obvious implications for our practice in Zen as well. Kenny Werner, a well-known pianist, in 1996, he's also an educator, and he wrote a book called Effortless Mastery, which was a guidebook for students who are at this stage in life where they're trying to learn the rules and how to do things a particular way. It's kind of part and parcel to learning any discipline, any skill. You kind of have to go through that process. And what he was trying to do was to impart to students the importance of being able to relax into that stage of their learning process. So rather than being totally stressed out and letting that flavor their approach to music, to their playing on that instrument. And it can really take their whole musical career, whatever that might look like, whether it's as a performer or as an educator. You know, if it's as an educator, then we're propagating this approach through the generations. That, you know, this is the way it is. This is the way it's supposed to be. That there is an importance in learning certain things and doing things in a certain way. But as the adage goes, after you learn all that stuff, then you need to just let it go. That's where the effortless mastery comes in. Take the time, really work at it wholeheartedly. But throughout, don't forget to breathe, you might say. Don't forget to just be at one with it too when you're playing. And it's that sense of being one with it where the effortlessness manifests. And then you can become a real innovator who just does their innovating by being themselves. Even though they might have complete mastery over their instrument. I remember there's a documentary about my favorite jazz musician taking this approach in the last 25 years or so, Wayne Shorter, who died a few years ago. And he talked in one of the documentaries on him about how some musicians, when they come out, it's really about their skillfulness and what they can do on their instrument, rather than just coming out and using that capability you have for self-expression, to be yourself, not trying to be a shining star, but just creating in this moment. So it's not about the mastering these particular practices. It is about being able to take them in and being able to actually practice suchness, your Buddha nature, moment by moment. And you can only do that by being yourself, because you are such a person. So to learn these things within the world of the conventional, within the world of the light, is simply to give you a form to place that in, to run it through. That's why there are all these myriad forms, whether it's music, visual arts, uh, martial arts, or whatever area you want to look at. There are all these different forms. And it's not that one is superior to another. It's just finding the right fit, the right form. Just like us with our search, which by various routes led us to this practice of Zen. It's just a form that we can invest our energy into in order to be ourselves. That's what we're trying to become. Not a good Zen Buddhist, but become yourself. Really, totally, truly. And then there's a statement by Dogen, because it's in our chant book, or I think it might be more broadly known by the Sangha. This is where he says in Genjo Koan, when Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they do not necessarily notice that they are Buddhas. However, they are actualized Buddhas who go on actualizing Buddha. Kind of like Count Basie's innovators who don't realize they're innovators. They're not trying to be innovators. So by this, what Dogen's describing, it's not about trying to be a Buddha. So you wouldn't even notice because it's just ordinary life, your normal activities. It's not something that's elevated on a different level, just being yourself. That's when Buddhas are truly Buddhas, just being themselves. So, echoing this was one of the quotes that John posted in his messaging service he provides us with from, I guess it was several weeks ago. It was before my talk at Hoan. And it came from the book we just finished, Ben Connolly's Inside the Flower Garland Sutra, where Ben says the harmony, all the different notes, the dissonance and the resonances are one unbroken whole. That's what's being spoken of in terms of our Buddha nature. So our Buddha nature consists of all these different notes. And that's the way we experience our life, is all these different notes. How do they come together? We experience it often as very dissonant and sometimes very harmonious. And however they appear, it's still part of this unbroken whole, Buddha nature. It has to be. How else could it be? That's the thing that we come to realize when we begin practicing suchness. We understand each moment, perfect and complete just as it is. Even though we can certainly find plenty of dissonance in each moment. And nonetheless, it is perfect and complete just as it is. This also encompasses the teachings of emptiness. And for this, I took a quote, maybe the best known quote from Walt Whitman, from Song of Myself. I am vast, I contain multitudes. All these different notes. That's what he was talking about. It's part of our being vast, the boundlessness. We can't be vast and not have within all these different notes, all the dissonance and the resonance. It's all there. It's all there. And to see this vastness that Whitman's talking about as the sacred, the divine. So I brought in, at this point, a quote by the great 20th century ethical philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, who uses the word infinity rather than God, which is a brilliant move. Because God, the problem with that is you're creating an object. This object we've named. Infinity is just pointing to boundlessness, vastness. So if we take Levinas' statement, look back at Walt Whitman, I am vast, I contain multitudes. He's saying, I am sacred, divine. I am Buddha nature. I contain multitudes. Myriad notes of all various descriptions. That's all part of this continuous whole. And what Levinas does is echoed years later with Kaz Tanahashi's updated English translation of the Heart Sutra, where he took the word emptiness, the term that is commonly used for the Japanese term shunyata. And Kaz switched that to boundlessness, infinity, same thing. So he's saying shunyata should be understood as boundlessness. Just like Levinas saying God should be understood as infinity, not as an object. So I know I've mentioned some time back, so some of you heard it, some didn't. My account of one of the sessions I did with Taigen Dan Layton, where he asked people kind of where a teacher in a group setting is asking questions, do you believe in God? And it helped me a great deal to have a Zen teacher pose that question. Because, of course, my response was no, but it stuck with me and I practiced with it. And I had a private conversation with Taigen afterwards. And it comes down to what is it that the term God is signified for you? The term, the God that most Judeo-Christians believe in, I clearly don't. In fact, I would join Bertrand Russell in saying, actually, I'm not agnostic, truth be told. I really am an atheist on that point, because uh, I would rate the likelihood that there is a God that fits that description on the same level as there being a Zeus who's got the thunderbolt. I put them on that same level. So no, I don't believe in God. However, there is that sense of God that many people who say they believe in God, they understand God as vastness, as boundlessness, as what we would see as the ultimate within our practice. So I think the important thing, as I came to realize, is that if you're going to have a spiritual tradition that goes down the God path, the koan mu becomes very, very important. Shifted a little bit, with the question, do you believe in God? With the response being mu, no. Even though within the Christian tradition, of course, that's not possible. It's all contingent upon God. So it forces one to reconcile mu with a belief in God. How do you bring those together? And I think if that kind of practice was done, Christians could really deepen their faith, because there's a lot of confusion out there. I know this from engaging in dialogues back in my interfaith days. But there's a lot of confusion about God and what He is, usually couched in that way. So I think doing that kind of koan work within that tradition could really be fruitful. And as a result, if one begins to see God as the infinite, their practice and our practice would start to look very similar in terms of seeing, the way many Christians already do, the divine nature of all things, the sacred nature of all things, as opposed to the strongly judgmental mind that all religions are at high risk of developing. And Buddhism isn't immune to that itself. Another quote, as long as I was on the matter of Christianity, a quote from a book that actually had a big impact on me. At a particular point in time when I started to investigate the relationship I was seeing between creativity and emptiness. So I did a real deep dive into creativity from that deeper spiritual aspect. And a book I encountered was from a faculty member of the divinity school at Harvard. And he titled his book, In the Beginning, Creativity. Which, I love the title. I said, you know, because it's in the beginning, in the middle, the end. I mean, it's throughout. It's always creativity. And that, so you don't have like this act of creation, which is where, because we need a starting point. But if we just see everything as creativity, it's not something separate that a supreme being imprints. It's just the nature of reality, the Buddha nature, if you will, that runs through all things, is creativity. That's how it manifests, what we call shunyata. So whereas Kaz came up with the term boundlessness, yeah, I would use creativity for shunyata. That which is, and for Kenny Werner's book, that which is form is creativity. That which is creativity is form, that it takes shape. And the same is true of feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness. It's creativity. Evolution, theory of evolution, kind of points in that direction. That those things develop creatively as responses to the environment, the complex, ever-changing environment. So it's this energy of creativity that flows through all things. But the quote from the author of this book, whose name is Gordon Kaufman, he says, the term God is intended to gather up, comprehend, and hold together all reality and experience, all possibilities and imaginings in a meaningful interconnection that can orient human life. If we wish to continue to use the word God, we would do well to understand it as basically referring to this ongoing creativity manifest in the cosmos. I'm on board with that. If Tiger asks, how do I believe in God? It's absolutely. Absolutely. So I apologize for forgetting to bring another book that I meant to bring science into this. Maybe next Saturday I'll start with that because I would like to share it. It's from David Bohm, who some of you may be familiar with. He's had a big impact on. He's a physicist specialized in quantum theory. And he was also a student of Krishnamurti. So he's a real interesting character. And he wrote a lengthy essay on creativity. So I had pulled a couple of quotes from that text, which I used as well, but I can't share them with you here. But something that I didn't use at OAN, because I only just turned it up yesterday, which it'll take the place of David. This actually comes from the unlikely source of a song lyric, but I've been known to reference these from time to time. And this comes from a Wilco song. So there aren't many contemporary song lyrics I would be likely to encounter because they're about the only contemporary band I pay much attention to. And I had something of theirs on yesterday, and all of a sudden I'm hearing it, and I go, whoa. I go in onto my computer, get those lyrics printed out, bring it in here. So this is the section that really struck me, that connects to what we've been talking about. If you were only you, if I were only me, if you were only you, what would I be? The next section, empty, sky of mine. Anything can shine. And then, if you were only you, if I were only me, if you were only you, what would I be? Infinite surprise, infinite surprise. And that gets repeated several times. Infinite surprise. If you were only you, I were only me, the sense of authenticity. You know, instead of just, which is the term we use. If you were just you, just sitting, shikantaza, just doing anything. If you were just you, don't need to do anything else. What would I be? Infinite surprise, infinite surprise. That's suchness. In Zen, in jazz. You know, they certainly have their forms they're following, but they're different every time they perform. I mean, when Kimberly and I were in New York City, we started and finished there Tuesday and Sunday at the Village Vanguard, seeing a quartet Joe Lovano has that was just formed for this gig, although it might have some legs to it. And the pianist was Marilyn Crispell. So they had a lengthy rehearsal on Tuesday afternoon before their first set, because they had some new music to go over. They did a couple of Coltrane numbers, which was a delight for me. So they had to have this quality of just being themselves, because it wasn't like they were playing something that they had much of an encounter with. So there was a form, there was music, but you know, it would have sounded very differently if they had just got in there following the notes like a beginning student. You know, and we know what that would sound like. They're struggling. There was no struggle going on at all. And yet, you know, it was deepening night after night. Now we just saw them at the beginning point, at the ending point. But Sunday, Joe's wife, Judy Silvano, commented to me about how the subtle changing that occurred over the course of the week, just from being yourself and just from, you know, listening to each other in that four-member sangha that formed. So it was different. Infinite surprise. They were open to the infinite surprise. They welcomed it, as a point that Wayne Shorter was always making about the unknown. That's part of life. That's part of creativity. How can you create if you just keep repeating the same thing? What you know. You have to be comfortable with not knowing. That's where the surprise comes from. And infinite surprise, as Wilco puts it, is just pointing to suchness, the role of suchness. It's infinity coming together to create surprise after surprise after surprise. It's not you as an individual, it's everything. How can an infinite surprise come from just me? It's the vastness that Walt Whitman spoke of. I am vast, I contain multitudes. It's Sandokai, the merging of difference and unity. That's a little bit like what I presented to Owen, but I figured whatever came out today would be another infinite surprise. And it was. Let me bow out. Welcome any thoughts you might have. John.
I don't know quite how well I could say this, but as you were talking about this today, what struck me is that while we talk about the delusion of self, it's only through the particular that we could get to the absolute. In the same way that we talk about words, and we write billions of words about something that's beyond words.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a piece in there about the emptiness and the generativeness of the emptiness. And I'm having a hard time kind of verbalizing that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it is that understanding. And seeing, going back then to Dogen, who says, to study Zen is to study the self. And that took on a whole new meaning based on what you're just saying.
Yeah.
You won't get there unless you do.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Because that's what we're starting with, this consciousness, our awareness, what's going on with us. Everything comes through that form. But that form, because it's like everything else, is constantly changing. And everything else is constantly changing. So if there's no creativity in that kind of a scenario, nothing would have survived.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Because things don't stay the same.
Yeah. The other random thought I had when you talked about non-sentient things, are they conscious?
Yeah.
The immediate thought that went through my head, are they just on a real different time frame that we don't appreciate?
Yeah, there's that too. Yeah. There's so many different ways of looking at it. But even without going down that road, just in our dimension, in our realm, there's plenty of evidence that we could, if we're more open about what we mean by, and they would use the word sentience, consciousness. They're kind of utilizing that in terms of awareness.
Yeah. Well, I think of the indigenous who believe everything has spirits.
Exactly.
Trees, rocks, rivers, whatever.
Yeah.
Everything had a spirit.
Yeah. And it influences how they relate to those things.
Yes.
In a way that we need. We need very much.
Yes.
So there's great value in extending this net as broadly as possible. So, yeah. Joe?
In the last week or so, we talked about our vow, and one of the vows was vowing to save all beings.
Mm-hmm.
And in thinking about the verses you quoted from Wilco and Walt Whitman, and while I was sitting today, also. I think one of the things we talked about is while we were defining saving all beings, was when we're sitting, effectively, we're sitting with all beings. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to comprehend all of this. And, it's at some point, I guess it's just rationalizing everything. I sort of understand but I don't get the feeling inside like I understand that I'm sitting with all beings, all Buddhas of all times. It's like I'm just sitting there. I'm just by myself. And
But that's impossible.
so I guess I don't know if I was asking a question or just making a comment, but I just don't. I'm not grounded in that feeling of being with all beings.
Yeah.
In that moment of sitting.
Yeah.
And
that's where the teachings on emptiness. So hopefully when we do get to the Heart Sutra in Living by Vow, that maybe that can help, because I think it requires a really deep understanding of the truth of the emptiness of all things to be able to get there, so that one actually can carry out the Dogen's instructions about studying the self, but then forgetting the self, which is kind of like what Kenny Werner was talking about, studying the music, but then forgetting about that. So we have to begin by looking deeply into it. But the deeper we look into it, then the easier it becomes to let that go.
to go back to Wilco, when you just be yourself,
Yeah.
are you being me? Are you being all beings?
You're discovering your vastness. We'll go to it. Bring Walt into this, that there's so much more that you can't possibly define using the world of the particular. You can't adequately define anything. That's where Sandokai comes in. It's useful to us to have. It's so useful, we could call it necessary. It's a requirement that we identify things as being separate. Just like, to use obvious examples, it's vital for a prey to recognize the difference from the predator. That's pretty clear cut. And there's so many comparable examples just in everyday life to have that recognition and to recognize the qualities of things. So just like for food, if you have a food allergy, you need to be clear about that. And you need to avoid that type of food rather than trying to be a good Buddhist about it and say, well, I'm vast, I consume everything.
Multitudes.
Yeah, that won't work well for you. You have to discriminate. But yet, in that discrimination, for instance, you might immediately leap to the conclusion that, well, everybody must have that same reaction, but the universe is vast and wide. And different people respond different ways to different scenarios. So the infinite surprise is, I respond a certain way and other people respond differently. So if we had that understanding, my gosh, there would be a lot more understanding at a global level, and that would serve us all pretty well. That would be true Sandokai, the merging of difference and unity. We could begin to appreciate what we do have in common and our differences, that those are both true. So Sandokai is also a powerful text, which thankfully we'll also be covering as a result of living by vows. It's going to be such a rich text for us in so many different ways. It'll be an infinite surprise to us. So, Erin.
So I used to be a music journalist, so I think a lot about music. And something that I've often said is that the only technical form of music that I like is jazz. In terms of like really technical music, a lot of the music I like is like actually musically pretty simple. And so like compared to something like metal, for example, which is also very technical, but to me it feels like there's no space. And I feel like space is the best part of music, and like that's what everything revolves around. And that I feel like is like one of the ways I'm connecting jazz to zazen, and is because it has such an amazing awareness of space. And I was thinking when I was sitting today about like levels of awareness of space, because there were moments where I was like, oh, right now I'm just in my head. Like this is the room that I'm in, is this one right here.
Yeah.
And then I was like thinking about having my awareness be in this room where we're all sitting. And then because I'm in front of the window, I was thinking about having it be like outside, like where the light is shifting and all of these other things are going on. And so I feel like jazz has this awareness of space that like can constantly shift. And there's also like a level of like attunement that the players have with each other, where they're like listening to each other, and they're so connected to each other that they can perceive like where the other person is going to go, kind of, and like and follow that. I don't know, there's just something I was thinking about.
Yeah, no, thanks for those comments, especially about the silence, emptiness in its more narrow meaning of just really not needing to fill things, to be comfortable with the silence, and to see that as a vital part of, of of this rich tapestry.
Yeah.
Just like in a painting, sometimes you could look at a painting and say, "Oh, it's so busy." So we did a lot of art viewing when we were in New York too, and covers the whole gamut in terms of the busyness of pieces, and to really be able to appreciate things that are more open, spacious. And that's where works by someone like a Rothko have such a powerful impact, because they're just so open. And that's kind of a hallmark of a lot of contemporary art, was that that recognition of the role of openness. So this is usually the case. The different arts, they influence one another. That's why Thursday night I was mentioning to folks that Marilyn Crispell is going to be in Chicago at the Art Institute talking about Cy Twombly. So she's going to be doing a 30-minute interview with a curator there about Cy Twombly in the gallery where his works are hung. And then she's going to do an hour-long musical performance inspired by Cy Twombly, with other musicians from Chicago who are also impacted by him. So what will come up is the impact of one art form on another, which is that's pretty much universal. How could it not be? That people are inspired by that, because it is a spiritual practice. I mean, practicing art. I mean, for Dido, that was one of the 8 gates of Zen, was art practice. So he certainly understood it that way. And it's a very deeply spiritual practice. So. For them, it's kind of the equivalent of having a spiritual practice, and some of them do. There are myriad Buddhist musicians, but also taking deep dives in other art forms, appreciating those is comparable experience at a spiritual level. You certainly find that in the arts, and especially, most deeply with jazz. But I experience it across the board. So it's kind of like going to a place like New York City is kind of like going out of Session. It's a deeply spiritual week, is the way I experience it. All right. We're striking noon, not as bad as striking midnight, but it means we should be.
I got
Yeah.
a joke. Has anybody heard of, and I have to get this right, the agnostic dyslexic insomniac who laid awake all night and contemplated the existence of dog?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my mood joke.
Different variations of that have been around for a while. All right. May
Our intention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it.
All right. Thanks for joining us.